All right, are we all here? Can you hear me, Amy?
I can. Can you
Can
hear
you
me?
hear me, Jim?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Well, we are recording and we are also now on Facebook Live. And so let's get this party started. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the On Air Advocate podcast, as well as our Facebook Live this morning, where we look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. My name is Tammy Flynn, and I am your host as well as the producer of the On Air Advocate. And I am absolutely so thankful and grateful that you have taken out the time out of your morning to hop on this Facebook Live, or whether you're going to be viewing this later on today on one of our other social media applications. As you guys may know, at the On Air Advocate, every week we pick a different topic. And so this week, we are taking the deep dive into the world of dementia. Now, some of you may know that dementia is kind of an umbrella over 100 different conditions that really affect the memory, the thinking, and the behavior of our aging loved ones. And so I am so honored and grateful to have these two amazing, inspiring, and powerful individuals here with me this morning that are going to share with us their journey through their eyes as being a caregiver with their loved ones that suffered with Lewy Body Dementia. Now, I'd like to welcome to the floor author of Other Me's and caregiver Jim Adams, as well as speaker and caregiver Amy Lokken. So thank you guys for being here this morning. If any of you out there know of anyone that has aging loved ones, whether it may be aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, please make sure that you share this broadcast, as well as if you have any comments and questions during this time, please drop them below. We will try to answer them towards the end. So take the floor, my friends. Jim, let us know a little bit about yourself. Let the viewers know a little bit about you.
Okay. Thanks for doing this, Tammy.
You're really welcome.
And I'm a aerospace engineer and worked down at NASA in Houston during the Gemini and Apollo missions. And then went to teach high school for 24 years. And after that, did some work with graduate students teaching teachers. And my background in care is that my wife.
Oh, you paused for a second there, Jim. Are you still with us?
Me's, called Other Me's.
Oh, okay, there we go. You're back with us.
and then have been working as a volunteer for Alzheimer's Association as a community educator from that time on. So that's a little background here.
Okay, and you kind of froze up. So you are the author of Other Me's, the book, and you wrote that in tribute to your wife, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and she suffered from the Lewy Body Dementia, as well as, did she have other conditions that she suffered from?
She did. She had battled cancer for several years, but also had the Capgras syndrome, which is a condition that goes with Lewy Body Dementia, where the emotional and the image in the brain is separated. And
Okay.
So she would see me, for example, as several different Jims. And so I record that in the book as I took notes and journaled. And then as Diane moved into a memory care center, I took the notes from the caretakers there, compared them with what my life is going on, or how my life is doing during that same time.
Okay, and so does everyone that has Lewy Body Dementia, do they also have that other component, or no?
No, the Capgras syndrome does not happen to all people. I don't know the percentage, Tammy, but it's probably more rare than anything.
Okay, and now from my reading up a little bit on the Lewy body, would you say that in the world of dementia, that affects about 20%? Is that about accurate? Or I know you both speak on this, you're extremely knowledgeable, or would you say that that percentage that I was kind of reading about probably isn't quite as accurate?
Yeah, Amy, isn't it about 30?
I would say that Lewy body dementia actually is the second leading cause of degenerative brain disease. It's often misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's or oftentimes Parkinson's. So what's actually being reported, it's probably somewhere in that 20 to 30% range, but in reality, it's probably much higher than that. It's just not diagnosed properly.
Okay, and we're going to get into that a little bit of how people even go about getting diagnosed, to know what kind you have and how to treat and how to approach and all of that. So thank you, Jim, for your kind of intro. And Amy, how about yourself?
So I come from a design background. I actually am the inventor and owner of my own company. While I was blessed to build my company while I actually cared for both my parents in my home. I am the youngest of 6. There is an age difference of 16 years between me and the oldest, and 6 years between me and the one before me. So I was the lucky one to be able to care for my parents. I grew up saying that my siblings would always have them longer than I did. So it was it's just how it was meant to be for me to have them at the end. My father died of cancer, and my mother, I had the longest, and she had Lewy body dementia. About a year after my dad passed, I chose to start the Lewy Body Dementia Caregivers support group here locally in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We are in our 8th year of that support group. And I started it on a Wednesday evening because it was the only night that I knew I could be guaranteed that I would have somebody to be able to stay with my mom. So there it is, 8 years later, here we are. And because of it, Jim and I were able to connect and really help support each other. And I did start it primarily because I felt alone. Even though I had a great support system of siblings and friends and family and neighbors, unless you're walking in those shoes of a caregiver 24/7, you have no idea.
Right. And you know what? Last night you put up that quote, and I'm going to steal it from you now forever, where you said that knowledge is important, but experiences are powerful. And actually, that is why I started the On Air Advocate, is that I feel the best content as a caregiver and an advocate myself that I have ever learned is from the journeys of others that have traveled the path. Because if you've never traveled the path, you can have a great brochure, you can have a great, manual when you go to the doctor and the doctor can read it, but living it every day is a completely different ballgame. And I think you both would agree with me on that. So because the geriatric and aging loved one world is I'm not a guru in that. I always say that I am a little bit more in that younger age group, young adults as well as children. Can you give our viewers, so if they're kind of like me that, as your parents are aging, your grandparents are, you're starting to research dementia. So when I went under dementia and I found that really is just an umbrella. Forever I thought dementia was what someone had. And then I'm like, well, this is an umbrella of 100 different things. And actually like Alzheimer's falls under that. So can you guys give a little bit more clarification, like kind of what falls in that area, and how does even one, if they're looking at their aging loved one, they're like, gosh, they're not remembering as clearly, things just don't seem quite the same right now, even if it's little minuscule things. When do you start that process? Where do you even go? And what are those different, formulations that are under that umbrella? And I don't know, I know it's a big question, so both of you can tackle it.
That is a mighty big question. I do believe Jim and I would be very much on the same page with this, that we could talk for literally years on that. Just to give you a little history of Lewy body, it was actually discovered in the early 1900s. I believe it was 1912. And I can definitely tell you there are over 75 different forms of dementia. Lewy body just happens to be the second leading cause that we know of. And lots of those dementias can overlap, including Lewy body. You can have pure Lewy body, and you can also have Lewy body and Alzheimer's and frontal lobe, and the list can go on. And it is one of those aspects that can be very hard to get a proper diagnosis, especially with Lewy body. And Jim, you are more than welcome to jump in at any time, because I know you and I have had numerous conversations on this subject, and that there really isn't a clear plan.
You're doing great.
You know, but it's true. We have had countless conversations, and it's just the tip of the iceberg as far as really where I think both Jim and mine's huge passion comes from, not just our caregiving of our loved ones, but where it goes in the future, because this could be any of us at any given moment in time. For Lewy body, oftentimes it takes up to 18 months and for physicians to really get a proper diagnosis. And in some cases that can be sadly too late in really getting them the best quality of life that they deserve.
I think maybe if I can jump in a little bit here, when we're talking about this, that, you know, these changes that occur with dementia are so subtle that we don't even see them once in a while. When we're with somebody 24/7, we don't see the slight changes in them, and we dismiss them as, oh, that's just aging, or, oh, that's just, it'll go away. And we don't see them, and we don't do anything about them. But when our children come to visit, for example, or their mom or whoever, and they start seeing these changes, it might be a time to take some action. And but it is so subtle, and part of the, you almost think it's part of the aging process, when in fact, as I look back on some of the symptoms, and I know Amy has said this many times, that 5 years earlier we began to see some of these things and didn't recognize them. So it's very subtle.
Yeah. And I think, Jim, you bring up a good point, especially you being a spouse of a loved one, I being the daughter of a loved one. You know, you were, in my case, my dad, who was with my mom 24/7 leading up to becoming their caregiver. And yeah, when I would stop weekly, I would definitely notice, and all my siblings would certainly chime in and say that, you know, we did see things at times, because you and I and anybody dealing with Lewy body knows that there is what is called showtime.
Yes.
So oftentimes Lewy body patients will, just like all of us, they're not intentionally doing it, but they will put their best face forward and act as if nothing's wrong, and be able to overcome some of those symptoms. And, you know, it happens to all of us, but with Lewy body patients, it definitely happens in front of specific children, doctors, friends, neighbors. It's an interesting process. I would like to say real quick, there are 3 different ways Lewy body is actually diagnosed. And it has to do with the fact that Lewy body affects more than just the cognitive aspect, which would be related to that Alzheimer's aspect. But there's also a mobility, which is where you're pulling in the Parkinson's diagnosis, and many of them end up having Parkinsonianisms and not necessarily full-blown Parkinson's. So the three main ways it's diagnosed is that cognitive issue, which is where it often becomes an Alzheimer's diagnosis in the first stages because they very much mimic it. Lewy body patients have a huge fluctuation in those cognitive abilities. It can change by the day, by the hour, and sometimes by the minute. It depends on where they are in the journey of Lewy body and which part of the roller coaster they're on that particular day. The other way is a mobility, which is oftentimes where the Parkinson's diagnosis comes in. In fact, when scientist Frederick Lewy was actually looking for a diagnosis of Parkinson's, which is actually how Lewy body was discovered in 1912. The third and final way, which is also the rarest way it's diagnosed, is actually through hallucinations and having those type of symptoms, which I would have to say in any of those three ways, having a really good neurologist that's aware and educated on the fact that there are more than 5 different types of dementia and understand that dementia is an umbrella. And when people hear dementia, it's not just automatically Alzheimer's, that there are many forms of dementia.
So my question would be, is if you are starting to see those little differences, okay, and you're saying that if you see those, to seek action sooner than later, just because, you think they're normal behaviors and then you wait too long, but who is the person that you go to? Is it the neurologist? Is it your primary? Who do you go to first with your aging loved one to kind of see where that starting point is? And then once you get to that place, is there truly any type of treatment to help, or is it just more of a maintenance of ever changing for the next however many years? Or is there actually a formula of therapeutic, you know what I'm saying, holistic, different types of approaches and treatments? Obviously, I found a lot of content on just approaching, you know what I'm saying, the loved one and your conversations and talking and, things you can do at home one-on-one. But really in that medical realm, is there anything that can be done even if you catch it in those early stages of any of those under that umbrella?
I think one of the important things, I would start with my normal caregiver or normal provider.
Okay.
And definitely have a good description, preferably written, of what the symptoms are that you're seeing in the loved one. Okay. And preferably even have a couple of writings from maybe more than one person, so that the doctors can see that you're not the only one seeing these symptoms. Mm-hmm. And then they'll test for other things, because there are other conditions in the body that can cause these symptoms that seem to be dementia but really aren't. Maybe some infections or urinary infections and that sort of thing. So they need to go through those first. Okay. There are some very simple mental tests that can go through, that anybody can take, and sometimes even our local aging county aging.
Would that be through the ADRC or through your ADRC?
Yeah, we have an ADRC, and you can just go in there and take one of these tests. And I think it's really important to do that, kind of build a little database on ourselves and see how things are changing as our life goes through too. But starting at the general physician, and then kind of eliminating some of the things that it could be other than dementia.
Okay, and once you eliminate those, would you say that under the umbrella of dementia, though, in that memory aspect, because I know I talked about memories, behaviors, whatnot, does that all become a neurological thing or not always? You know what I'm saying, where you need to see a neurologist for that?
Well, my thinking would be to see a neurologist if these things Or if you've eliminated other things
Okay.
that the general physician might look for, then I think it might be time to take a look at a neurologist.
Now, Amy, you were speaking to the fact that, to make sure that whatever neurologist, though, that you might see knows greater than just those 5 or those heavy hitters that everyone knows about. Where do you think the best resource is? Because, I'm a researcher of doctors. I'm all about hiring, firing, traveling, finding the best care that I can. Where would you say people can access that to find out who are those experts? Would that be under some of those foundations and organizations that you gave me? Did they have a list of doctors that are a little bit more, I guess, globally aware of all of that?
Yeah, I think I think that's a good place to start. The other thing is you can actually look at neurologists' profiles, and will actually show what their
expertise in like, I just don't know if it would say, they could be leading in dementia, but do you feel like any neurologist that was really a heavy hitter in that area, they would have listed that they know more than that? Do you feel, is that something?
Actually, my mom's neurologist actually did have those listed, and Lewy Body was one of them. So there, it definitely is, and there are certainly certain physicians throughout the Mayo Health system, as well as many of the big hitters out there that actually do have those specific areas. The other thing, and I just want to second what Jim said about having things written down and things that you're seeing as a caregiver, whether you're looking at Lewy body or any, honestly, dementia, since that's what we're talking about today. I would definitely encourage people to keep a journal. I certainly did with my mom. When we heard those words, Lewy body dementia, we had no idea. We didn't even know how to spell it. And by the way, it is Welewy. We had no idea what it was. And as I am like you, Tammy, I jumped into researching and trying to figure out what it was, and really becoming that advocate and trying to educate myself. And that was a huge part of, my comment about knowledge and all that last night, was the fact that if you can't educate yourself, you can't guarantee that, no offense, somebody in the healthcare system is going to educate you.
Right.
The other thing is the Lewy Body Dementia Association does actually have a checklist on their website that you can download and actually go through, that will actually help you understand the symptoms and how Lewy body is actually diagnosed, and how many of the cognitive issues they need to be considered a potential Lewy body diagnosis. And the reason this is so important is because one of the major things that differentiates Lewy body from, we'll just say, Alzheimer's, is the fact that they have a major sensitivity to certain medications. One of those being traditional antipsychotic medications. So my mom was originally diagnosed because she was having hallucinations. Had she been given a traditional antipsychotic medication, and we were not seeing a neurologist that had knowledge of Lewy body, she could have been prescribed a traditional antipsychotic medication, which could have shortened her life. Robin Williams, actually, the first thing noted in his autopsy was the fact that he had Lewy body dementia.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Now, in researching and finding out all of the, the different information, once you guys have gathered that, and I want to real quick, actually, I want to go back to when you guys talked about writing a list. I think that is so important in any caregiving aspect, as you were talking about, and having multiple individuals writing the list of what they're seeing. Because you're right, when you see people every single day, sometimes the things that you you thought were really there, you were like, oh, well, no, you know, because it averages itself out and you let it go. So definitely the whole family, or, you know, your brothers, sisters, aunts, whoever it may be, making sure that they're writing that content down. Now, once you have decided, hey, my loved one, they probably need to see somebody, you go to your primary, you then go to, you know, possibly a neurologist, and you find out that this is what your aging loved one has. So what's next? You know what I'm saying? what is the plan? Is there that treatment? Is there those therapies? Is there things coming to the home? I know you said there's some of it. There is medications that you can, you know, that you can be on. But this may be a short sprint, or it may be a long run, depending on the age that this happens. And so time to put your tennis shoes on and figure out your plan of action. And so for people that are just starting in that process, if you think back to when you first found out and how that journey started, kind of bumpy and rocky, and what would you say is the next course of action, I guess, after the doctors and all of that, from your own experiences?
If I can jump in here, I think this idea of becoming educated as a caregiver, as highly educated as you can about the disease, because you become when you do journal, as suggested, you do become almost a scientific observer. I mean, and it's hard to observe if you don't know what you're looking for. And so you have to do this research. And I'm thankful for the internet, because it allowed me to do a lot of research and find out a lot of things. And that keyed me as things to look for in Diane, things that I would never have looked for had I not known some of the things I found out through research on the internet. So I think this whole thing of becoming a knowledgeable caregiver is so important, and we have that information so close by us today. And I know some people don't use a computer, but if you have a son or a daughter that uses a computer, use them to help you with the research and become familiar with the disease and the symptoms.
Right. And I think that is exactly what I'm always promoting, is that you are, you know, your strongest, powerful tool for your loved ones. And you have to be the one to take the bull by the horns, and you have to be the one to educate yourself and advocate. And there is absolutely, positively no part of that is easy. So, you know, some people are like, oh, it's a lot of this and a lot of that. It sure is. It sure is. But after years of doing it, you will become an expert, and you will be able to advocate much better and figure out, you know, this is truly what they need. And you'll know to ask the right questions. Because I think that's a lot of it, is that people emotionally, all of this is emotionally draining. And when I talk about aging loved ones, as well as our children that have different abilities, there's a lot of a mourning process that happens. You know, when you first find this out and your aging loved one is going through this process, that they are not the person that they once were, whether it's your wife or your father or your mother or your brother, whatever that is, you now, especially when we talk about aging loved ones, you have known them for all of these years as this person, and they are changing. Unlike someone who possibly, like myself, my son was born with the issues. So though there was that mourning process and what I thought was going to be as having a little boy and what I thought was going to happen, definitely I feel like sometimes it's even harder. I don't, you know what I'm saying? I think everything is kind of equals out, but sometimes I think that you have gotten to know your loved one for all of these things and had so many years, and now seeing that fading in front of you, there's a lot of emotions. And so to be a strong advocate, I think that you need to get through that mourning process, realize that this is your new normal, and be able to really effectively take in that medical information so that you can advocate best. So you found, Jim, that your best tool was getting on the internet, starting to research, starting to get the knowledge that you needed. But that knowledge, as we talked about, is important, but how did that really play out? Like when you were caring, Amy, for your parents on a daily basis and changing behaviors and getting yelled at, I'm sure, and not always having them happy with you and you for your wife, how did that play out emotionally during that process? Did you find that there were highs and lows and peaks and all different days? And how did you deal with that for our listeners, you know, that are going through that and have their loved ones that really, you know, as we know, whoever is caring for us, whoever is the caregiver is getting beaten up. My son yells at me every day. He's always angry at me and I'm okay with it. If he is, but how did you guys kind of go through that process?
You know, for me, it was a learning process, and I'm still learning. And both my parents, you know, I'm watched from above today, but it was a learning process. And I would actually have to say I have to thank my dad for helping me understand what being present meant, good, bad, ugly. The one thing I can say is being present. It's not easy. Life isn't easy. You know, but we're given an amazing experience to go through. At least I was, to experience the journey I was able to experience, especially with my mom. You know, nothing else really matters except what's happening in that moment. As Jim and I have talked numerous times, there isn't a workbook, there isn't a play guide. It's as different for every person as our thumbprints in how our loved one is going to react and how we're going to react. And there isn't a right or a wrong way, but I will tell you, for me with my mom, a Lewy body patient having that anxiety and having a real thin line between aggression at times, I learned that a lot of times it was me putting that out there. Like I was maybe stressed or worried about, you know, God knows what, bills, work, juggling appointments, it didn't matter. And I learned to understand that from my mom. And when I would see that, and you know, when you really get to know them and can see what's about ready to trigger, I would say I would excuse myself and I would leave and I would go to the other end of my home. And if it meant screaming in a pillow, maybe crying, you know, maybe, you know, whatever it was to release that. And for me to just really become back to center and realize that nothing else mattered but that moment. And my main job was to give her the best care I could possibly provide, because she, you know, deserved that. And then, you know, really regather myself and walk back into that room and approach her in a different way was a huge thing for me to learn. And it worked most of the time. But I think it was educating myself. It was allowing myself to understand that I was human and I wasn't going to be perfect at this, because I didn't know. Lewy body is a roller coaster ride of emotions and abilities, and they can change by a snap of a finger. And you just have to hang on tight and surround yourself with honestly really good, positive people who are, and regardless of who or what you're caring for, having a good support system and that knowing that you're not alone.
And I think, so do you feel like you turning kind of that pain into purpose with starting that support group? Do you feel like that, because that was during the time, did you start that while you were still caring for your mom, correct? On those,
Yeah.
You started that then. Do you feel like between that and then removing yourself, so for others that are going through this and their elderly loved ones are becoming combative, did you feel like for you, some of those times, instead of engaging in that, walking away doing the screaming in the pillow, centering yourself again, and coming back to the situation that worked for you best?
It did. It did. And being able to then reach out to other people who, were potentially experiencing the same thing. And even if they weren't, it was the fact that they were experiencing something similar. It could be a different type or a different form of aggression, or but it was knowing I wasn't alone, and it was an extremely important and huge factor in why I started the group.
Okay. And what about you, Jim? I know that, which I can't wait to read your book and your daily journaling of all of this, because that's amazing to do, and to do that, and then to be able to read it back and really every day be able to go through, that journey that you had traveled. But what do you think were things that you found that helped you aside from the journaling? Because I think that's fabulous to be able to do that, because that does get some of that off of our chest when we do journal that way.
Yes. I'd like to go back a little bit here to the idea of becoming knowledgeable, because many times Diane would ask me, so what's going to happen? And we'd have that discussion, and she would say, well, you get on the internet all the time and you research this stuff. Tell me what's going to happen. And so I could answer some of that, and we could face it head on. And it was pretty precious times when we had those discussions, and it was very meaningful. I think what helped me a lot was I sometimes call it real-time acting, because it's trying to get into Diane's world.
Right.
For example, she'd want to go home or want to ask about her dad and mother, who passed away many years ago. But getting into that, say, where's your dad been? And we'd lead into a discussion on, well, he's in the field and he was driving tractor. And it would lead into her world. And they turned out to be very precious times to me, even though it was completely out of context in the real world. I was in her world at the time. And that meant a lot to me as a caregiver and as a husband, to be able to communicate, even though it wasn't right now, it wasn't in the now, so to speak. And that helped. And I think in terms of helping relieve some of the stress, because it's an extremely stressful caregiving experience with this disease. It's a cruel disease. But what helped me was my hobbies of playing music, guitar and harmonica, and getting away doing that, or going down and building a model airplane while Diane was sleeping, or something like this. The idea of taking care of yourself is very important. And I didn't realize that at first. And through one of the caregiver classes, I learned that. And I'm very thankful I learned that, because I could have dropped all of those things and just put everything in this brain of mine, and it'd still build up and almost explode sometime, But having the hobbies and having the music particularly, because when you're doing this music, you're only doing that. You have to concentrate on finger picking in the banjo or whatever, So that helped me an awful lot in relieving some of the stress and handling some of that.
That's you said something key about that. Caregivers, if you're a caregiver, you can't care for anyone unless you're caring for yourself. So finding those small outlets, and I think for everybody, you maybe playing music, for everyone it's something completely and totally different. Some exercise, just being able to go for a few minutes. I've actually myself, because, I'm a daily caregiver every day, all the time. I have found it very therapeutic to be on Facebook, be on these webinars live with people, because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's real people. Oh my gosh, they're really here. They're humans. Because I don't go far without my son, and so it's nice to be in the circle with other adults. And I think, Amy, you spoke to it before. Even if we have a huge network and tons of family and tons of friends, there is something so So I'm saying so tranquil to ourselves when we are in the presence of others that have traveled or are traveling that same journey that we are, that can understand our, how we laugh about things that would make normal people cry, you know? And so I think that you're spot on with that. So those are amazing tools for people to use. Now, as you guys continued on this journey, was there ever a point where, like, what was that pivotal changing? Was there like any pivotal changing point, or did everything kind of stay the same, as this disease carried on? When there's the stages of it, what are the stages for this? For dementia, what happens in progression? Like, does the memory just continue to fade? Did the behaviors become more escalated as weeks and time and all of that go on?
Well, that's an interesting question and can go in about a bazillion different ways, to be honest with you, Tammy. For my mom, through research, Lewy Body Dementia is found that a lot of people diagnosed at 65 or older actually presented symptoms as early as their 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Okay.
My mom was in her mid to late 30s when she gave birth to me. So I had a very different mother than all my siblings. And I can tell you, because of what I know about Lewy body, I would tell you that in my teenage years that my mom probably had early onset Lewy body dementia, which is frightening, to say the least. And I don't mean to make light of that, but it is, thinking back, we know that once my mom was diagnosed, and you could ask pretty much all my siblings, if we really thought back, she definitely had it for at least 10 years previous. I would say she had it for many more years prior to that. And just little odd things. And Jim's book is amazing, and it can definitely give you a glimpse into the life of what many of us experience of our loved ones who go through Lewy body, although we're all different. But there were many a times that in reading Jim's book for the first time, that I, thought I was going to read through it like that, and caught myself having to reabsorb it, because it almost forced me to relive parts that I would have preferred to leave in a distant memory. So they progress. My mom also had the hallucination end of it. A lot of them have huge fluctuation in their cognitive ability. They have Parkinsonianisms or full-blown Parkinson's. They can have a sleep disorder where they're acting out their dreams, arms and legs flailing, screaming and hollering. They can also have the hallucinations. They can have, the sensitivity to medications. I mean, my mom basically had the full gamut, including, she had a reaction to over-the-counter Benadryl, which is one of the worst things you can give a Lewy body patient. So it's all those things of really educating yourself and understanding that there are some horrific things that can happen within this disease, but it doesn't mean your loved one's going to experience all of them. But being prepared and being aware, so like Jim said, you can understand what you're looking for is valuable. But understanding at the same time that may not happen. So I think it's amazing and beautiful that, Jim and Diane had the time to discuss what could possibly happen. And I think all that is important in going through the different stages, because some will go through it very rapidly, and others will, it'll take literally years from diagnosis. We have a long time support group member who's been there since day one, who's Husband is still very much alive as far as physically being, and has, been up and down that roller coaster more than I could ever imagine.
So like I was saying, this could be a short sprint for somebody, but it also could be like a very, very, very long run for the amount of time this lasts. Now, does this have any genetic component? So like your mother having this, what is that underlying for genetics or people who have, like under that umbrella, does it all fall under that? If you have any of those characteristics of that 100 under that, umbrella of dementia, that you are possibly at risk genetically for having that?
Wow, that's a good question.
I know what my personal opinion is.
There could be some indications, or might be some indications that there are markers in DNA, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean if you found that marker that you would get Lewy body,
Right.
So you just have to read. I know, for instance, when you're speaking of DNA, I know there's a test been developed, and I got the address and can get it to you, Tammy. A DNA test to find out which antipsychotic drug someone might be very sensitive to. Okay. And that would be a very important thing. I wished we had it when Diane was so ill. Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of, because if my grandmother had it, will I get it? I think the chances are pretty slim.
Okay. Is there any early onset testing? Obviously, when you talk about the ADRC, you're not going to go there when you're 30, you know what I'm saying, and be tested. So, or is there any age that they always say that you should go in for memory testing after your primary?
Probably at 50.
I feel like I need memory testing now sometimes.
With ya.
So at 50, but there isn't, if you go to your primary and you're like, my mother had, Alzheimer's, my father had Lewy body, would they tell you at any certain age that you should probably at the age of 35 or 38 or, at any marker time to go in for early testing? Or is that in this realm? Because there's so many things that I deal with, with conditions with my child and my family that, my kids and my other kids have been tested for. I've had DNA testing done for my son and genetics and all of that. So just wondering if you guys know.
I don't know of any early testing that would say, well, yeah, you're going to get Lewy body dementia, or your chances are very high. Not that it might not exist, but I don't know of it. To me, it seems like it's getting the symptoms in order and trying to delineate between, say, Alzheimer's and Lewy body in terms of symptoms that would probably be the way it happens. I mean, the hallucinations, all of the, in my case, the Capgras syndrome with Diane, mm-hmm. These are all things that are pretty unique to Lewy body dementia. And then, of course, there's the Parkinsonisms. She fell a lot, and balance was highly affected. And you put those together, and you end up with a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. So I don't know.
But you don't know. Okay. Now, on speaking on that, with when you don't have that balance coordination, it is affecting your muscle tone in whatever way. Did your wife end up needing then, like as the time went on, to use like a walker to be aided to do her things? Did she end up towards the end being completely full care, from, getting her in bed, toileting, etc., or no?
She did. Yes,
Okay.
as the disease progressed, I would say particularly about 3 months or so before she passed away, it kind of accelerated, and it was almost exponential. It was very scary. Um, she went from 1 week where we were walking around a block about a mile long together at the memory care center to within a week having to be in a wheelchair. So that happened very, very rapidly
Okay.
when it happened.
Okay. And what about you, Amy? Did you experience any of that?
I did. I experienced something rather similar, although we do believe something happened to my mother. She walked out of my home on a Saturday to attend the funeral of her stepmother, and walked across the parking lot, was greeting people, was recognizing people, and from across the room and everything. The night before this, she was complaining of some GI issues.
Okay.
She also had pancreatitis a couple times throughout her life. So there were things, hindsight, that you kind of think about now. But my mother came back to my home on hospice after that weekend. And she remained on hospice for almost 3 months. So, and leading up to that, there were times that, I slept with my mother the last year of her life because she needed help, when she would get up to be toileted in the middle of the night and different things. So, and she did use a walker on, different occasions at times, sometimes a cane. Sometimes it was just holding on to me or somebody else. But yeah, there was definitely a progression. And she totally became a
Full
two-person
care.
transfer at the end.
Okay. Now, with that being said, I am later in the week, we are going to be doing some other lives with some different coordinators, an MD, actually, and some community supports and whatnot. But from your aspect of the people who actually traveled the journey, what kind of supports did you find in the community or within your insurance companies and all of that whole, because that's like a whole nother, ball game, to be covering these services, covering your time off of work, covering, if you need a walker at home, if you need a hospital bed, where does that fall under? Because obviously it's a medical condition that starts to happen, but it's an onset of a condition. It's not something you're born with. So if you guys have a little bit of info for our listeners just on that, when they're, in that predicament that you need a full-time, care worker, is it just going right to the ADRC? Does the ADRC effectively help with that dementia and that umbrella? I'm not certain of that just because I haven't traveled that journey.
For me, I would highly recommend starting at your ADRC. We here have a very strong ADRC in that coalition of dementia and definitely trying to help. Jim can probably answer a little bit more of this end of the question. Me as a daughter, and the fact that they were in my home, created a few different challenges, so to speak, in some of the services. But I would definitely start with the ADRC.
Okay, so the ADRC does do some supportive care or some supportive funding for people with dementia.
Yep, or they can at least help direct you if they don't have all counties are, I believe, different. And Jim, you can correct me, but all counties are different in what they're able and what they support and are able to. But they can definitely help direct to different agencies. It would definitely be the number one place I always send people is
the ADRC to start.
Yep, yeah. Whether it's our local, and I get contacted from people all across the country sometimes. So that's where I always first direct them to go.
Okay.
I would second that. And the resources that they have, everything from helping you find someone to come in and relieve you for a few hours, or
some respite care.
Respite care, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other thing I think is so important was, to me, was the offering of courses to help caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was a totally new experience to me.
Mm-hmm.
And having those courses available and taking that course with other people who were caregivers, that was extremely valuable to me. So I would second the ADRC, because the resources are, in our area anyway, are fantastic.
Now, are you guys knowledgeable, or maybe someone in your support group, Amy, that's dealing with stuff of their loved ones? Are there memory care, I guess, centers, facilities? Obviously I know there is nursing homes, residential care facilities, but does that hub everyone under that? Or is there any specific places that you know of that really treat, or their goal and their mission is to be more of a memory care living facility center? Do you know of any of those, or if there is anything across the United States that's just very, very well known for their care that way?
There are many memory care facilities actually across the country, and in many areas they're actually doing a lot of these memory cafes and different things like that, which are typically put on through a ADRC or Dementia Coalition type of advocacy that brings together those memory care units oftentimes. And I know that throughout the world, they're actually doing some pretty incredible dementia communities, which I think is a beautiful thing.
Okay, so there is some that is such a thing. I just wanted to make sure that if I'm directing people, to look that way. And after we are done with this live / podcast, I will be listing all of the resources that you guys have given me, because there are some organizations that you both kind of gave to me that you think have been extremely advantageous for you guys to dive into and utilize. What are those agencies, again, that you guys really think you've gotten a lot of support and information from? Aside from the ADRC, I think there was, is it the Alzheimer's like.org?
Yeah, Alzheimer's Association and the Lewy Body Dementia Association. That's a great website. A lot of resources, a lot of help. There are 24-hour phone numbers there on those.
So like a 24-hour help center?
Yes, help centers.
Okay.
Amy, you've got a couple of other ones that you've been on too.
I do, and I would have to second the Lewy Body Dementia Association. It's lbda.org. Has a wealth of information. That's actually where you can download a couple of the checklists for the symptoms and comprehension of understanding Lewy body. They also have a great listing of all the support groups throughout the country, which is helpful. Of course, there's not as many as we would love to see, but they're out there. The 800 number, and you're actually getting to talk to probably somebody who's walked the rock and can definitely talk the talk from a caregiver's standpoint. It's highly run by past caregivers. The other one is LBDtools.com is another website that is vast with a ton of knowledge. I do believe the gentleman from there is at one time was beginning founder in the Lewy Body Dementia Association itself, but him and his wife have done an amazing job. There's obviously tons of support group private Facebook pages. Jim, I know that you even have one, and things like that are just, they're just all there are a ton. It's a matter of looking and finding what serves you. And what's convenient for you, and what makes sense for you. You have to find, maybe it's going to an Alzheimer's support group fits you better than a Lewy body, or maybe that's all you have, and maybe you can't get to one in person, but you find one online, or you're able to, pick up the phone and, have that, 5 minutes to talk to somebody, or and have somebody talk you through something. There are a ton of resources out there, and sadly sometimes they're not
utilized
utilized as much as they should be, because sometimes they do take a little bit of effort on the seeker's part.
Dive into it. I did go on both of those for, I believe it's like Alzheimer's.org, and then the Lewy Body Dementia one. And I can tell you for myself, as being somebody who has combed websites before, they are very informative, and I did see tons of great content and information. The other way, and again, the reason that I started, the On Air Advocate, is I believe that there is a lot of loss within our community in the auditory fashion. If you are actually in the trenches, so you're not past it, you're in the trenches every day, how much time do you really have to sit on the computer and comb it? And so I always advise getting a portable earbud that's, stick it in, and sticking on webinars as well as Facebook Lives and things like this, where people are coming on and they are giving information and good content, because then you can gather that without having to sit in front of the computer, or at least when you go to the computer, what the right resources to go to right away, instead of all of that digging there. And Jim, would you add anything else for resources, support groups, or did Amy cover that all?
I think she did an excellent job. But I would, one thing I would say to caregivers, don't be too proud and be afraid to ask for help, because that was one of my difficulties, was asking for help. You want to be a caregiver and you want to do everything yourself, and that's an impossibility.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. You need help, and you have to fight that, and you have to say, I need some help. I'm going to go see my local ADRC and see where I can get some help. So
right, some resources.
Yes.
Oh, go on, Amy.
I just want to touch on what Jim just said, and it is the one thing that's the hardest thing for a caregiver to do, is ask for help. So if there's anybody listening that isn't a caregiver but knows a caregiver, I personally think one of the hardest, I spent my 30s caring for my parents, so I don't know how people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s do it. And I think the reason we have a hard time asking is because we don't know what we even need help with. We just need help sometimes. So I would encourage somebody who, if you're not a caregiver, but you know someone who is, just stop by, give them a call, do something for them. You don't always have to wait to be asked.
Right. I know that sometimes when people are in their trials and tribulations, they're going through the journey, and people are from the outside and they're watching. Sometimes they feel like, should I text? Should I call? Am I disturbing them? Are they busy right now? Or they're in kind of trials and tribulations themselves with maybe their work or their life or their family, and they feel like they don't want to burden you, with any of that. Or it is that they're sitting back and they don't know always what to say. And I have found that as a caregiver for my since I've been a caregiver basically since I've been 21 years old. And so a full-time caregiver. And I find that people sometimes just don't know what to say, but I always say, you know what? You don't need to say anything. Just let somebody know you're there. Hey, a quick text. Hey, I'm thinking about you. A quick instant message, a quick email. I always say it absolutely positively changes your whole mood and your feel for the day, just knowing that somebody's thinking. You don't need to have the answers, because guess what? We don't even have the answers. So we're not expecting you to have the answers. but that, you know, that reach out. And I think too, you know, when people see things like this, if they know their friends are going through or relatives are going through struggles, share Facebook lives like this, you know, share things like the On Air Advocate or the Lewy Dementia, you know, support page and all of that with them, because they might not have, you know, the right things to say to you, but giving you some camaraderie with others that are going through that same thing, you know, it just is so is so wonderful, fabulous, and embracing for us. You know, at least from my perspective, I think that that's so helpful, and just to know that people are thinking of you, you know, even though they don't have the answers for
Amen
you.
to that.
Mm-hmm. So we are over an hour now. We're at an hour and 6 minutes, I think. So I just wanted to look real quick. I think that everyone's questions that were put up, we did answer, talking about where to start out with, whether it be at a primary or a neurologist. And I think we said we would start with that primary. But maybe as family members, if we're seeing some small things, for everybody to start making a list of that. Wondering what the ADRC is. The ADRC is the Aging and Disability Resource Center, and every single community and county has a different one. So always to check with them first for your resources. Now, I'd also say in this area, definitely checking with your insurance, you know, like if you have I believe it's Medicare, you know, as well as, or is it Medicaid? No, it's Medicare. Whatever one it is, if they're past the age, you know, of having regular insurance, that's, you know, just through their other loved ones that are working, if nobody is working anymore, to check with them and what is covered and all of that. Let me just see. Another question is, do people die from dementia?
No, the answer to that is yes, they do. I mean, Lewy body is fatal. So is Alzheimer's. So the answer to that is yes. And sometimes it's a long, arduous, cruel journey, but it always ends up being fatal.
Yep.
And
I would say it's no different than cancer. Everybody, you die from complications of a disease in the end.
Okay. So I hope that fully answered that question. I think we have covered all the rest of them. And obviously, you guys know that any other questions that you do have, you can always send them over to the On Air Advocate, whether you're visiting our website and doing that in our contact information or on this Facebook Live. And obviously, you guys will be feeding this. So if people do throw out questions later today or watching the replay, you guys can hop back in and hopefully answer those questions for them as well. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, with that, we are at 1 hour and 8 minutes, and I would like to thank everyone for taking the time this morning to watch this Facebook Live of episode 6 podcast of the On Air Advocate. Thank you so much, Amy and Jim. You guys have been just a wealth of information. I feel blessed and honored that you guys have taken the time out of your morning to spend it with me here. And this is many more series to come. So there might be a time that you guys are coming on again where we're really, you know, we kind of gave a general overview that we might, you know, pick into specific parts of different things for our aging loved ones. But I am just so thankful that you guys joined me this morning. So with that, I would like to wish everybody a fabulous day. Thank you again for listening, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.